Amir, thank you very much for being with us today on the Future of the Future podcast, where we talk everything and anything related to tech and future. We are going to be talking today with you about what it takes to be a technology leader, the things they don't teach you at school. And I thank you for having you here. You are such an amazing professional with over 20 years of experience in the technology industry and more than 12 years as a CTO leading technology teams. So it's a privilege to have you here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. 20 years makes me feel like I'm a little older now. Can we just say
not talk about that? Yeah, 5 years experience.
A decade or two or something? I don't know. Maybe that's not even worse. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. You and I go back, I guess, a few years now. And it's been a pleasure working with you and your company, Exceed. And so when you asked if I could be on this podcast, I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's have a little fun, talk a little bit about whatever you want to talk about. So yeah, for sure.
Very good. Thank you, Amir. I appreciate that. So Amir, tell us your story. How did you get to be the CTO you are today?
Yeah, I will absolutely tell you the story. So just in general, I grew up right around the Chicagoland area, born and raised outside of Chicago, went to school in Chicago and graduated with a computer science degree. During my, I would say 3.5 years in college, I never really understood what it even meant to be a programmer. Of course, I learned the languages that I was supposed to at that time. It was Java and whatever else, learned all the theory and took all the hard classes. But it probably wasn't until my final class, which was like a project-based class, in which we all had to kind of form groups and build a project, where I kind of understood exactly what it meant to implement implement technology, do design, do analysis, and use all those diagramming skills that they taught us, and actually build a product. In our case, we built a little mobile app for train schedules. And I think back then, I was probably the first, not only taste of really what it meant to be a developer, but also what it meant to be a leader, because in that time, I was the project lead. We went on to do really well in the overall class, got an A in the project that we did, and that was kind of my first taste. And so right after I graduated, I joined Accenture in one of their, specifically one of their core architecture groups that spanned across multiple functional areas within Accenture. And so that was my first true taste of what it meant to be a professional when it comes to developer, spending long hours at various clients working on technology. Accenture was the type of place where they kind of threw you in the fire and you either sink or swim. And fortunately, I swam, I guess. My very first project, I was at Blockbuster, and we were building out its Netflix DVD mail to home competitor. And I was, a few months into my career, and I was working on the back-end billing system. And I would ask myself, late at night, trying to figure out how to, build these batch systems, connect with different credit card authorization platforms, et cetera, et cetera. So why are they having me do this? This billing system is probably the most critical part of this entire project. And here I am working on it. So long story short, spent 5 years at Accenture, worked my way up to the manager role. And then after that was hired by one of my former colleagues at Accenture, working for this company called Score Educational Centers, which was owned subsidiary of Kaplan. And that's when I got into kind of the education field. I spent 5 years at Kaplan. And at Kaplan is really kind of where my CTO career, my interest in being a CTO started. In that 3 years into it, I was leading up a division technology perspective within Kaplan, managing a fairly sizable team, and left there, joined Everspring as the VP of technology, and then over after about 3-4 years became the CTO here at Everspring, and that's where I've been ever since. So that's kind of I kind of skipped over obviously a lot of juicy details, but that's kind of the fast track version of how I became a CTO and my career to become a CTO.
Very good, very good. And so it wasn't until the project that you were doing in university that you learned what it meant to be a programmer, and it wasn't until you got to lead the technology division at Kaplan that you really learned what it means to be a CTO. And so the next question is, but what does it mean to be a CTO, and what are the main responsibilities of a CTO?
Yeah, so there's different organizations define, I think, CTO in different ways. So I'll offer my perspective, and also from where I've been from a career journey. So companies will have a CTO role, and sometimes they'll have a CIO role. Startups, smaller companies, mid-stage companies usually just have one role, which is a CTO role. And the CTO role, again, there's variations of it, but the way I look at it is ultimately responsible for all things technology within that organization. Depending on how strictly aligned they are to technology, that could be a services company that has a CTO. It could be a product company, a SaaS product company that has a CTO. It could be a consulting company that has a CTO. Different variations and different types of companies also dictate the type of role that we're going to have, right? So from my perspective and what I do, when I say all things technology, I mean all things technology. So that goes from an IT help desk team, which may not be as traditional of a team that fall under the CTO, that supports end users with their computer problems, right? To the application development team that's actually building and supporting a product, the infrastructure team, which is building and managing and maintaining your servers, nowadays typically cloud-based. It also, for me, includes cybersecurity, although in some companies, when they get large enough, you'll have a CISO that is responsible for cybersecurity and managing that aspect of it. But in my case, I manage the cybersecurity and/or the team that I have reports into me, manages cybersecurity. And then finally, and again, this might be split up in different companies, I'm also responsible for product. So the head of product in our organization reports into me as well. And so, product strategy, product approach, of course, working very closely with our functional stakeholders, we determine, what we're going to do with the product, but that team reports into me as well. Again, at different companies, you may have a chief product officer, or you may have like a CEO or president that's really responsible for the product direction. But here, kind of all fall under what I do. And again, it varies. I think that the biggest thing as a CTO is, from my perspective, again, different CTOs and definitions change. So, for example, in some startups, you'll have a VP of engineering that is kind of responsible for the day-to-day technology, operations, building of the product, working closely with the product team. And the CTO will kind of be on the side, will be the face of the technology for the company, but may not have the actual organizational leadership, right? Instead, what they'll be doing is working on like cool, different, innovative projects, doing different things. Maybe they'll have a small SWAT team that's working on different things. So I've seen that model as well. But at least in my case, as a CTO here, I do it all. And my preference is to do it all. I not only love the technology aspect of it and working with the architects and working with my application developers, et cetera, but I love the managing of the organization. And then the other critical part of what you do as a CTO is you basically are, working in close conjunction with the other executives in the organization to dictate, I shouldn't say dictate, to figure out the strategy of the organization, but offering the technology perspective, right? How can technology help enable our goals, our financial goals, our project goals, our general strategy for the organization? That's a big piece of it as well.
Very good. So a CTO works in all things technology related. In your case, you manage a lot of teams. So there's a lot of management, coordination, and strategy. Sometimes you can be working on strategic projects, and you also have a key role, which is to enable other leaders in the organization achieving their goals through technology, right? So it seems like you are at a very high level. You have to have the capability of zooming in and out, right? But should a CTO be on the weeds? Should a CTO ever be found coding or reviewing code? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so again, it varies, right? So I'm going to hedge the way I answer this. At an early stage of a company, I personally feel a CTO should have their hands in everything, right? So when I first started at Everspring, I was, writing Apex code in Salesforce, reviewing mobile code, building out and email marketing campaigns. I was pretty much doing it all in the weeds, really building things and making sure that we were, building things as quickly as possible because of the startup. You have to build fast. At the same time, making sure we're not releasing garbage code, which sometimes unfortunately happens. And as you evolve and as the company evolves, you start hiring people for those different responsibilities, right? So I was the first Salesforce developer in the company, but then I eventually hired a Salesforce developer. I hired a Salesforce team. I hired a BA, et cetera, and now they're responsible for it. And we hired an iOS developer at some point. You hire, different roles as your company grows, because you just don't have time to do that one thing. And so as your company grows and your company matures, and I've had the privilege of being at this company for long enough where I saw it when we were, the company was like 18 people to about 200 plus people that we are today. And so part of that organizational evolution, you hire the appropriate people. So now my role, I love to, architect, I love to design, I love to get in front of the whiteboard with the developers and architect and kind of figure things out. But I also have to be a bit careful because I have a team for that, right? So if I spend too much time leading the conversation, and others will let me, right, because of my role. But what that does is it may stunt the development of an individual or the organization itself. And so you have to kind of be a little careful about how closely you step in. So again, it depends on the stage. Now, if there's like a cool pet project, absolutely, I'll get involved, and sometimes I'll do some Python coding and scripting. Nowadays is the most that I do to move something along. But in kind of where the organization is today, the organization doesn't necessarily need to be very technical in terms of hands-on coding. But I believe what has always given me success, Matteo, in my particular role in my career has been that I can get really, really deep and speak the technical language of developers, no matter what language that is and what coding language that is, et cetera. And then I can step out and have conversations with different functional stakeholders about what their needs are, and then step it up even higher to then talk about company strategy, et cetera. So long story short, I do think that it's worthwhile for a CTO to be able to step into the weeds when necessary and contribute from a hands-on perspective if necessary, but also be able to step back when necessary.
Got it. Thank you for that. In your career, who helped you get where you are? Was there a mentor, a coach, someone that you remember fondly that had a great impact in your career?
So absolutely, and that's one of the things that everyone that is aspiring to be a CTO or whatever C-level executive or VP or whatever the best developer they want to be, best architect, whatever that end goal might be, or whatever milestone they might have. Learning along the way and knowing and understanding that you don't have all the answers, knowing and understanding that you need mentors, and listening more than sometimes talking is a really important factor that will lead to your success. And so I've had a tremendous amount of luck with having good managers and good mentors. I've had good managers and mentors. I've had bad managers and mentors. I've had good managers and mentors that have some bad attributes. I've had bad managers and mentors that have had good attributes. But all four of the scenarios is something you can learn from, right? Even if you have a terrible, terrible manager, that in itself is a valuable lesson, because along the way you look at the things that person is doing and say, I'm not going to do that because of this, that, and this, right? And on the opposite end, if you have a great manager, of course, you learn from that person as well. So yes, without naming names, et cetera, I've had, not only technology leaders that I've reported into and managers that have been great, but also functional folks, right? So right now I report into a president that's not very technical. I learned tremendously from her. In my previous role, I reported into the head of a division. He was not very technical, but again, learned a lot of valuable lessons about how to manage teams, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's you're going to learn from everyone. You're going to learn from your people that you're reporting to. You're going to learn from your colleagues, and you're going to really learn a lot from the people that are reporting to you. As long as your ears are open and you're listening and you're understanding, there's always opportunities to learn and grow.
Very good. So when I hear you, it seems that there's a lot that you learn working on the job, right? On that first project that you did at college, on Accenture, Kaplan, etc. There's a lot of on-the-job learning. Now, what will be your advice for someone aspiring to be a CTO? What should they be very, focused on in their careers, even early on when they are at college? They think they can be that type of person. They want to be that type of person. What should they be focusing on besides the technical things?
So there's a lot, and there's a lot of ways to answer that. And I'm a little old school, and I'm going to be a little old school in the way I answer this. And for folks that are kind of entering into their careers now, or have been in their careers for 5-10 years, they may not like this answer, or at least part of this answer. Hopefully they like some parts of it. But it's what I've always found success, or what's led me to success. One of the factors really boils down to ultimate ownership, right, of the task that you're working on, which absolutely, I think most people would agree with. But for me particularly, and maybe this is like some kind of obsession that I have, and it's not, it's my personality more than anything else. What that did for me early on in my career was actually led to a lot of long hours, right? And so, nowadays when we talk about long hours, people think it's very unhealthy. And in many cases, or some cases it could be, right? We don't want to have developers working, 10, 12, et cetera, hours per day, because it does lead to burnout, right? But with me in particular, maybe because I was on client sides, so I didn't really have much of a personal life when you're at the client side, the extra, 2, 3, 4 hours that I ended up doing from a work perspective, for me was a tremendous, again, growth opportunity, right? So if I was working on a task and I wasn't done with that task, it would never be like, all right, it's 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, it's time to go home, right? It was, I need to work on this until I wrap it up and finish it. And so for me in particular, it helped me not only, of course, learn and understand the problem that I was working on, and the skill set, et cetera, was growing, but also in front of my functional stakeholders, the clients, et cetera, it, from their eyes, really helped to firm up the position that I was accountable, and I was had ultimate ownership of over my tasks, right? And that was really critical when we talk about moving up in different levels in your career. So if you have a manager, or if you have somebody else on the functional side that looks at this person and sees that they have ultimate ownership and they push things through, et cetera, it will help you get those promotions, right? If that's what you're looking for. Now, on top of that, of course, another thing that was really great for me is I had a lot of interesting jobs during college. For example, I used to sell cars, right? I worked at Best Buy, selling computers, and I, was a census taker at some point. So these jobs, especially as kind of early part of my career, helped in terms of building the interpersonal communication skills, right? Being able to talk to people, being able to, understand and listen. And the big one is empathy, right? Being able to empathize with my clients or my stakeholders, and kind of the thing that I mentioned earlier, being able to sit there and just kind of listen. So when you're in college and you're starting off your career, you'll learn the hard skills and you'll learn the technical skills. And some jobs, that's all they're looking for. They give you, a lot of tests along the way to make sure that you know the technical skills. But while you're working on those technical skills, also build those soft skills. Also really understand what motivates you. Understand, what ownership means to you. what delivery means to you, what stakeholder satisfaction means to you, because those additional things are going to go really far in helping you to accelerate your career. So I have a lot of little cousins that are in the technology field, and they kind of asked me like, what's a recipe for success? And I tell them all the time, you know what, work smart, but sometimes you have to work hard. Finish your tasks. Always be the one that is going to be completing your tasks sprint by sprint. People will notice that. And sign up for things. Raise your hand. If somebody's like, hey, I need help with this, be the first person to be like, I'll help you, right? And don't do it in a way that is kind of insincere, right? Oh, this person's always looking to take on more work because they're trying to get that promotion. No, be sincere about helping people, right? You know, it's, you know, if you have a helpful nature and you're sincere about it, it shows. And then another thing I'll say, and it's been always great for me, is don't take credit for stuff. Always give credit to other people, because if you do good work, and that'll just shine and it'll come through and people will understand and see the work that you've done. But when you give credit to others for, and rightful credit, I mean, don't you know, give credit to someone that didn't spend any time on the task. But when you give credit to other people, it not only builds goodwill with those folks, right? But it does help to show that you're an unselfish person, just focusing on you know, the good of the team or the good of the project or the good of the company, etc. That answer the question? It was a little bit long.
Yeah, you know, it was amazing. So a lot of hard work, a lot of ultimate ownership, a lot of empathy and interpersonal communication skills, a lot of soft skills. When you talk to your little cousins, right? Let's go back to that, and maybe they are going to school right now. Do you think schools are mentioning some of these? Do you see your cousins relating to what you're saying, or is this coming as a surprise to them? I myself, at least sometimes, I say similar things to people, and I find it that it's kind of out of fashion, right? It's weird. It's changing a little bit right now, but what do you see, and what do you stay in touch with what, you know, schools are teaching? Are they going to this?
Yeah, so, you know, of course, again, curriculum and programs vary school by school. I mean, there's, you know, thousands of different computer science programs that you can sign up for. And in a bachelor's degree, you're going to have a variety of different classes. So I don't want to speak universally about this, but from what I've seen, no, it's not necessarily like, you know, going, you know, again, this was some time ago, but going through my program, these things weren't discussed. Of course, you know, we had project-based delivery and project-based assignments, et cetera, that we had to work on, which kind of force you to work with other people and, you know, exercise those different soft skills. But there was never, at least that I saw, a class or a course or something about those soft skills and how critical they are, or leadership skills and what it means to be a leader. And so what I do have a lot of little cousins and friends and others that have gone through computer science programs, and I haven't seen it. And it's kind of, it's a miss. I think there's a big miss there, right? Where it should be emphasized and it should be discussed. But I guess also in the 2-year program or 4-year program, they're trying to, you know, teach as many of the hard skills as possible. And maybe, you know, there's electives out there that folks can take, but they're not necessarily focusing on it. So yeah, again, this is from my own perspective. I don't know what you've seen.
Similar things to you, and similar things in my career as well. Different background. I'm an attorney, but same thing, right? Lot of theory, too little practical skills. Now, let's go back to all of that experience learning that you had, and let's talk about mistakes. What mistakes made you learn the most? What mistakes do you remember, like, oh, I learned so much from this one, that you can share, of course?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of mistakes. So one that I still talk about to this day is that I was working on a production database, and I was doing like support of students, like basically just you get a help desk request ticket that comes in, and a password needs to be reset, right? Or a username needs to be changed, and somehow it can't be done through the front end. So then you get that, it goes to tier 1, then it goes to tier 2, and then maybe it comes to tier 3, which would be, and back then it was like those all kind of bundled, merged together. I was resetting a student's password in production, right? And select ID from, profile or whatever it was, and update the password to whatever. And instead of doing select ID, I did select all. And I updated and or reset the password for every single student in our database. And so 7,000, 8,000, 10,000.
Wow.
I mean, it was in the thousands, maybe even more than that. And so the very first thing, and my manager was there at that point, the very first thing he said to me was, go tell the president. Because we were a small company. This was like when I was hired at right at Accenture, a small company. Go tell the president, and then come back and let's work on figuring out a solution, right? And that was one of the toughest conversations I probably ever had. Walking into the president's room and being like, by the way, I just did this. It was painful, very painful, embarrassing, shameful, but came back and within probably half an hour to an hour worked on coming up with a technical solution, a quick way to kind of reset everybody's passwords or bring the passwords back. I mean, so anybody listening to this will say, well, you did 100 things wrong there, right? So let's not talk about all the 100 things wrong that happened in that particular technical snafu. But what I learned at that point is about responsibility, roles and responsibility in an organization, ensuring that the right people have and a small subset of people have the keys to those systems, right? And at that point, after that point, I never I went out of my way to make sure I never had admin level access to a production database again, right?
Got it.
And so, go ahead.
No, what I love about the story is, and you talked about that value before, right? Ultimate ownership. You owned it. You went and talked to the president, and that was probably the hardest thing to do, but you did it. And it is one thing for the president to learn from you and another thing to learn from someone else. Had the president learned from someone else, maybe your story, your future will have been completely different. But you took it on yourself, and your leader had a great response. That was a mentoring, or coaching moment there. So very valuable.
100%. And you're right. That's where now when I'm in the position of having to report things up to president, leadership, etc., when things go wrong, I know how to do it. I've done it enough times, but it's something that you just need to do. You need to be accountable and just need to fess up right away rather than hiding from it. On the opposite end, when I have developers or others that come into me and say, hey, something went wildly wrong, here's what's wrong. It's never about discipline, right? It's never about at that point yelling and screaming and like, why would this happen? It's about, okay, thank you for letting me know, thank you for informing me. Not a good situation, go fix it and give me updates as we're fixing it. I'll handle the communication with everybody else, et cetera, et cetera. We'll focus on why it happened and do a post-mortem afterwards. Right now, let's focus on fixing it. And that clears your mind a little bit, or the developer's mind or whoever's mind, to go focus on fixing the problem rather than dealing with, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
What challenges do you think young developers face today that didn't exist when you were going through college? What is new on the ground that you go like, oh wow?
Yeah, I think there's a lot, and it's the challenges that I think in general in the wider industries and wider kind of population are facing, right? One of them, it just happens to be the fact that the social media has changed a lot of things, right? Social media, and whether it's Twitter or whether it's LinkedIn and all these kind of things have put, I think, more pressure on developers, have put more pressure on technologists that are earlier on in their career to look for ways to either escape from what they're doing because it's like too boring or it's not fun. Look at this, what this person is doing. They had a startup and now they're doing this. They're traveling around the world. It's it's put this unnatural pressure on, I think, a lot of developers and technologists again, to go chase something that may not exist, right? And so it's kind of a problem with the wider culture that we have right now, whether it's in development or whatever, sector it could be. The other thing is, things are changing a lot faster than they used to. When I was at start out my career, the first 5 years, I was a Java developer, and of course I had to learn new frameworks as they came along, and I had to really understand how Java is used at different levels, and eventually became an expert in that particular language. Nowadays, every 6 months, every 3 months, year, there's new frameworks, there's new languages, there's new technologies, there's new and different industries that you can get involved with, whether it's like cybersecurity or machine learning, AI. I mean, the list goes on and on. And it's hard to establish yourself in a niche like you used to be able to do in the past, when things are constantly shifting and changing. And there was a very clear delineation back then between front-end developer, back-end developer, database developer, et cetera, et cetera. And now the expectation is that, or it's not the expectation, but now it looks better if you're a full stack developer. And as a full stack developer, you kind of really need to know it all, right? And so it's a different pace of evolution when it comes to technology. You always have to be on your toes. You always have to be learning new things. At least if you're a good developer, and that takes more effort outside of your work to kind of learn and make sure you're on top of things. Mateo, you're on.
Yeah. Final question. So thank you for that. Final question. And this may go back to the effort that you put early on your career when you are able to, right? But how do you balance being a CTO with your family?
Yeah, it's exactly what you said. Early on in my career, I feel like I paid my dues in that I worked hard, right? I worked and I did whatever I needed to do in order to deliver the project or deliver my code or push things through. And now at this point, I have a great team that does an amazing job. You hire the right people, you build a good organization, and that frees up your time then to be able to spend time with your family, right? And that doesn't mean that I'm working less hours or fewer hours than I should be in my role. No, but it's not as intense, right? When you can rely on people to do what they need to do, and they have that ownership. You're not the one that's having this be, on a late night release, right? Instead, you could be spending that extra time with your family, et cetera, et cetera. So, a few things I'd say to folks is make sure you're sleeping, get your sleep, right? That's important. But at the same time, 6 to 8 hours at our ages is probably good enough. And then the time that you do have available to yourself, spend it on valuable things, right? Absolutely watch that new series on HBO, but don't spend 8 hours watching it. Maybe split it up across the week. Absolutely go and play that video game, but again, have some discipline in terms of how much time you're spending in any one given day, right? So as long as you have some discipline in terms of your time and your schedule, which of course takes some time, but I feel like I have, and your work gives you the flexibility, then you can, and I have been able to balance and spend the appropriate time that I need to with my family. At the same time, the family understands. I'll be in the middle of a movie, and if some emergency comes up, I'm picking up my phone and I'm taking it, right? And they understand that, and that's kind of the give and take, right? So if you're going to be there for your company when they need you, and your organization and your team when they need you, then your organization and team should kind of return that favor to you and give you the time that you need as well. Very
good. Thank you, Amir. It was great having you. I appreciate it. I learned a lot, and hopefully our audience will learn as well. Until the next time, we'll definitely stay in touch. Thank you, my friend.
All right, Mateo, thank you so much.